Good morning, colleagues, and thank you again for being here with us. My name is Zaina Awad, and I am the head of news and multimedia at the International Labour Organization. Today, we are launching our Global Wage Report 2024-2025, and I'm very pleased to have our Director General, Gilbert F. Humbo, along with the co-author of the report, econometrician and wage specialist, Rosalia Vasquez Alvarez, to launch this report. As you know, the report and all relevant material and information, including this press conference, is under embargo until 11:30 local time here in Geneva. So please make sure to abide by the embargo. So to start off, and without further ado, I'll hand over to our Director General, who will officially launch the report. Over to you, Director General.
Thank you so much, Zaina. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this press briefing to launch our ninth edition of the Global Wage Report. This report presents recent trends in wages and explores wage and labor income inequality, an issue, as you know, that is at the heart of our commitment to social justice. Let me begin by an overview of the most recent real wage trend covered in the first part of the report. The good news is that wages are recovering. We have seen a rebound to positive values in 2023-2024 after a period of decline in 2022 when the real wages fell globally to negative values because of the high inflation that we are all aware of. In 2023, the global wage growth rose to 1.8% in real terms, and in the first half of 2024, the positive trend continued, with global monthly wages rising by 2.7%, also in real terms. If this trend is confirmed, it will be the largest gain in more than 15 years. This growth reflects a recovery from the challenges of the pandemic and the inflationary pressures that we have lived in the past few years. However, this positive trend is not shared equally across regions. In the G20 countries, for example, real wage trends show a clear divide. In advanced economies within the G20, real wages grew modestly by 0.9% in early 2024, a welcome recovery after decline in 22-23. In emerging economies, wage growth was much stronger, with increases of 6% in 2023 and nearly the same in 2024. This improvement is partially due to slowing inflation since late 2022. However, prices remain high and low-income households continue to struggle with the rising costs of living. This is particularly true for many minimum wage earners. In many countries, recent minimum wage adjustments in 2022 and 2023 were not enough to keep up with inflation, leaving minimum wage earners and their families vulnerable to financial hardship. Also, in many countries, the data shows that wage growth has not kept pace with productivity growth, meaning that in many countries and many sectors, the value created by workers is not being fairly shared. Let me now turn to the second part of the report, which delves into inequality, highlighting some encouraging recent changes, but also the persistent level of wage and labor income inequalities that continue to affect millions of workers worldwide. First, it's important to emphasize that labor income, rather than other sources like capital gain, is the primary means of livelihood for most households worldwide. Reducing labor income inequality is therefore essential to narrowing overall income disparities, a vital step toward achieving a better social justice for all. Here are some of the key findings of the report. Starting with recent trends, the report finds that since the beginning of the 21st century, wage inequality has declined in about two-thirds of the 72 countries for which data is available. This finding is similar irrespective of the different measures of inequality that can be used. This is encouraging. In fact, the report shows that in a majority of countries, wage growth over the last 20 years was faster for low-paid workers than for average workers and for high-paid workers. Another good news is that wage disparity between countries also declined as wage grew more rapidly in middle-income countries than in high-income countries. However, despite these improvements, wage and labor income inequality remains alarmingly high. For instance, the report highlights that the lowest paid 10% of wage workers worldwide earn just 0.5% of the total global wage bill, while the top 10% of wage earners capture 38% of this same total wage bill. In terms of wage inequality, the report reveals that, on average, inequality is most pronounced in low-income countries where a significant portion of workers earn far below the median wage. Middle-income countries show more moderate levels of inequality, while high-income countries generally have the least disparity. Regarding key groups affected, women and informal workers are disproportionately represented among low-wage earners. In wealthier countries, migrant workers also face significant pay disadvantages. The report confirms, and this is quite disheartening, the report confirmed that the gender wage gap remains stubbornly high, with women consistently earning less than men across all regions. This hourly wage gap is estimated at 11% in high-income countries and between 15 and 19% in middle-income countries and 17% in low-income countries. Let me add another important evidence highlighted in this report. When we include the earning from non-wage workers, labor income inequality becomes even wider, especially in developing countries where informal work dominates. This highlights the significant challenges these countries continue to face. The report calls for strengthening wage policies and institutions, as well as tackling the root causes of low pay. Let me mention three key messages. First of those three messages, it's important to improve wage policies by establishing adequate and effective minimum wage systems through social dialogue with minimum wage rates that are regularly adjusted and strengthening collective bargaining to ensure workers have a say in their pay and receive a fair share of economic gains. Secondly, we must do more to close the gender gap, including through measures to eliminate discrimination and promote equal pay for work of equal value. Thirdly, we must address the root causes of low pay, such as low productivity, informality, and the undervaluation of jobs in some sectors, such as the care economy. And we also need to promote a more enabling environment for sustainable enterprises. Unfortunately, as the report shows, there are still millions of workers across the world who earn very low wages. With the measures proposed in the report, it is my hope that workers will progressively secure at least a living wage to ensure a decent standard of living for themselves and their families. Thank you so much. And obviously, I now welcome your questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le DG. Thank you very much, Mr. DG. We are now ready to take your questions. Please raise your hand, and when you have the floor, please do share your name and your outlet. Pardon. Okay, no question so far from the Palais. We have one that has come through the YouTube, and I will go ahead and read it. It's from the journalist did not state their name or their outlet. Considering that 1 in every 3 workers globally is a non-wage worker, and the majority in low and middle income countries are self-employed in the formal economy, what strategies does the ILO suggest for improving labor income inequality beyond traditional wage policies?
Thank you so much. First of all, we just highlighted in my introductory remark some of the 3 key policy recommendations that we are making. We are also making a more extensive recommendation in the report itself. But coming to the informal economy that you referred to, it's important that to note that ILO has been working on that together with others, where we do know that normally we have been making progress, quite frankly, until COVID in 2019, where the data start getting even worse because of COVID. So there was a step back after COVID, which now we are again continuing our work. But there are several. One of them that comes clearly in my mind in responding to your question is moving forward. We are. It's important for us to use digital technology, including AI, to really make the informal economy increasing their productivity. Although that also comes with some challenges, namely the infrastructure and the energy transition that is needed for the informal sector the informal workers to be able to benefit from the technology. Obviously, I will not underestimate the importance for us to ensure that the fiscal policies are also there to encourage, not a deterrent, but to also encourage the formalization of the informal economy, including also business registration to facilitate all those processes and so forth. So those are policies that ILO has been pushing forward, and we do believe that we have to continue pushing on that, and not on ILO, but all colleagues involved in this matter.
Thank you, Mr. DG. Rosalia, would you like to add?
Yes, perhaps what I can say is we have actually taken into account in this global wage report the fact that non-wage employment, non-wage workers are in fact a significant fraction of the global workforce. In fact, if you look at the non-wage workers, who are the vast majority of them are informal, we see that in terms of informal employment, since the year 2010, we have remained at 60% constant. They have increased by 50% in absolute value. And what the report shows is that if you take into account non-wage workers in the equation to estimate wage inequality, labor income inequality increases, but we also observe that labor income inequality across the 21st century has actually declined. So it means that there has been a shrinking from the bottom and the top of non-wage workers in terms of earnings. So there has also been an improvement for non-wage workers. But nevertheless, these individuals are still at the low end of the labor income distribution. Most of them are informal. A significant fraction are women who work in the care economy, who work as domestic workers, who work in sectors which is not protected usually, and where they have more deficit in terms of working conditions. So it's not just a matter of inequality, but it's also their working conditions that need to be improved. And what the Director General has suggested, and I reiterate, is that there is a need to increase the formalization of the informal economy, to increase the number of formal employment. And this can be done through increasing labor productivity, particularly of the small-size enterprises, and promoting the formalization of the informal economy, increasing the skills of workers in the economy, and this will actually promote the increase of wage employment. And increasing wage employment also allows for an increase in the fiscal space of economies that at the same time could spend more in creating job in employment. We have to say one of the key factors behind the decline in wage inequality is the fact that if you look at the data, wage employment has increased actually quite significantly in low and middle income countries. In fact, wage employment if you look at 2000s compared to 23-24, has increased from 46% to 52%, whereas self-employed or own account workers have actually declined from 44 to 48%. And this means that this increase in wage employment has actually contributed to reduce wage inequality. So clearly, the fact that we have a significant fraction of non-wage workers in the world, particularly in low and middle income countries, is an important factor to take into account if we want to reduce inequalities, wage inequality, labor income inequality, and household income inequality.
Thank you very much. I don't see a hand among the Palais. Aha, I'll hand over we do have a hand. We have another question that came in via YouTube, but I'll hand over to Antonio. Antonio, please state your name, outlet, and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Antonio Broto. I work for EFE, Spanish News Agency. So, Mr. Hombo, you mentioned that this year may be the year with the biggest rise on average for salaries in the last 15 years. I wonder if you can comment, this can compensate the losses of acquisitive power in the previous years due to COVID, due to the rise of energy and food price, all this that created social and political instability all over the world. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much, Antonio. I wanted to make sure that I got your question right. So your concern is about the what's happened in the pre-COVID era multiplied by the inflation and that we have seen, and the food crisis that we've seen at the end of the COVID, the impact that is having on the workers. I hope I got your question right. If not, please bounce back, please.
Yes. If the rise that is happening this year can compensate all these problems that we are talking about.
No, I don't think that, and Rosalia may certainly add here, but I don't think that it will compensate. We're talking about a rebound. We are rebounding. The news are better. We want to be very clear that when the news when the news are good and better, we want to say it. We don't want to just say that the things are bad, 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 bad. However, it is important to keep in mind that, on a cumulative basis, we are not saying that we have fully or totally recovered. The workers still are really suffering from the high price, the inflation, and as you have said it at the beginning, and Rosalia just again giving more detail on that, the fact that we have a lot of disparities from one region to another remains quite very, very important dimension we have to take into account. The other thing that is I can bring here, let's keep in mind that we also still have in our latest ILO latest estimate is 402 million of workers that are struggling to earn the $2.5 a day, what we call the working force on that. So that's still a major concern of us. This is why you know very well that ILO has been really pushing for ensuring that we have a living wage. Talking much more a living wage, which is going to be very crucial in moving forward, that to ensure that every household at the end of the month has a decent living wage to take care of the household need. So the good news we are talking about now should not be seen as compensating the fundamental, and I would have hoped that the answer is yes, but no, it's not. It does not compensate all those structural challenges that we accumulated in the past 5 years. And one point that also we point out is let's don't forget that we still have that big, globally speaking, all income put together, that the inequalities are growing in the world on that. And this is also something to keep in mind in responding to your question. You want to add here?
Yes, of course, Antonio, you can see this from the report, but let me just give you some estimates to quantify the answer to your question. So first of all, if we look at the COVID period, the workers that lost more are those who were at the low end of the wage and income distribution. And as a result of the recovery from COVID, it's true that many of these individuals went back to the labor market, but then inflation hit these households and their earnings, and we see that the wages were reduced. Now, if we look in a cumulative sense, the losses as a result of COVID and inflation were around 3% globally. If we look at the year that we are right now, at least the most current estimate shows that the gains have been 1%, so clearly we're not yet there. We haven't yet recovered the levels of earnings that were before the COVID or before the cost of living crisis. That's one thing. The second thing I want to point out is that if you look at the low end of the wage distribution of the policy that has a significant impact is minimum wages, and it is true that a significant number of countries, more than ever before, have adjusted their minimum wages to keep up with the cost of living crisis. But the reality is that these adjustments have not been sufficient to make up for the real increase in the cost of living, in inflation. And another thing is that at the low end of the income distribution, these households where you have the vast majority of minimum wage earners, their propensity to spend is higher in those items which have a higher cost of living effect. So these are housing, food, and energy. The CPI for these items is higher than core CPI or is higher than the average CPI. So it means that for these households, even if you were to compensate for the cost of living according to inflation rate, they would still not be able to afford the cost of living, the effective cost of living that they face, because much of their earnings goes into items that are suffering a higher increase in terms of inflation. And then finally, I just want to say that if you look at extreme poverty from 2000 to 2023-24, that's in the past 24 years, extreme poverty has actually declined from 28% to 7% globally. But in the past year, those workers in extreme poverty have actually increased by 1 million. So it shows that this crisis, this cumulative effect on crisis, has a cumulative effect on increasing the number of those individuals who are in extreme poverty, particularly in low-income countries. So as you can see, to answer your question, is that there has been some recovery, but not all news are good news.
Thank you very much, Rosalia and DG. Any other questions from the colleagues on the Zoom link? Okay, then I'll turn to another question that we got from our YouTube before that was emailed to us. And the question is, the report highlights regional differences in wage growth, with emerging economies experiencing stronger growth than advanced economies. How does the ILO propose to balance these disparities?
Yes, it's true that in advanced economies, wage growth is slower compared to in emerging economies. There are many reasons for this. In advanced economies, we still have the demographic bonus. There are structural there's a structural change going on. We have also that they have benefited from globalization. So all these factors imply that in emerging economies we still have a leeway to increase wages in real terms, whereas in advanced economies, labor productivity is slower. There is no demographic bonus. Automation in the labor market is having an impact. There has been more flexibilization in the labor market institutions, whereas in emerging economies there has been a strengthening of labor market institutions, particularly in the past few decades. There has been an increase in the number of countries with minimum wage policies that have strengthened wages and the increase in wages. So what we need to is to try to understand at country level, particularly through studies, what has actually determined the fact that there has been a slowdown in a slower growth in advanced economies. In advanced economies, perhaps we need to look into labor market institutions. For example, in countries where labor market institutions are perhaps weaker, we see that wage growth is also weaker, whereas in advanced economy, in labor market institutions that are stronger, we see that wage growth is stronger. So maybe looking into labor market institutions like strengthening the minimum wage, trying to promote the living wage, trying to promote collective bargaining at the middle of the wage distribution, and perhaps also trying to see if at the top end, for example, corporate social responsibility also reduces wage inequality and increases the earnings of those in the middle range, would also increase the earnings in real terms in advanced economies. In emerging economies, clearly the problem is that of informality, low productivity, and formalizing the informal economy, promoting higher wages in undervalued sectors such as the care economy would also allow for an increase in wages in real terms above those that we find right now.
Thank you very much again. Any further questions? Okay, it looks like we do not have any more questions. So I'd like to once again thank our presenters today, the DG and Rosalia, and thank you for joining us for the launch of the Global Wage Report.